So let's see what I can do for this portion. So God is infinite mystery? No. George Fox helps give us a clarification as part of his integrity related to Jesus, right? We've got Jesus' own integrity. How do we evaluate his message? His message of love was a message that contained all these various elements about seeking, cleaning the cup on the inside, shining your light in front of others, going and learning. The good news for the poor. We've got the great banquet parable. As you do unto the least of these, we've got that parable, the least of these parable. And so we see that, and heal the sick. So it's a psychosomatic medicine parable relating to that component. At the very least, not closing the door simply on technological allopathic medicine, and certainly not on Medicare for all, right? The national health plan, pro-social policies by government, which goes to Luke, right? Luke 22, I think it is. Jesus also went so far as to talk about, you shall not lord it over others. You shall be a servant, right? So, and beware the deceitfulness of wealth, right? All these are crucial issues. Matthew 13, by the way, that is from the mustard seed parable. The deceitfulness of wealth that chokes the word. So we have then the, that Jesus, and so then, that is the integrity of Jesus's lifestyle method. Pray, the spiritual life also, right? In relationship to God the parent. Father, mother, in the modernized sense, by already advanced by some or many. So spiritual, we've got all these components of Jesus' integrity. And so then this other questions even about, the Good Samaritan parable is there, and then love your enemy. And so then that all needs to be reconciled. And it requires a certain amount of education, understanding of concepts, abstractions, to be able to go beyond the literal, go beyond the appearance that, the Samaritan is my enemy. And understand that the parable represents how the Samaritan is a concerned human being, not concerned with caring values, not with club salvation values, not with creedal values based on in-group, out-group dynamics, to use that psychological term. So, we have the integrity of Jesus, and then we can get to the issue of, I am the way, I'm the only way. Jesus saying that. And the wonderful way that philosophical scholarship with empiricism gives us concepts in psychosocial studies to understand that Jesus as the way has unfolded in an amazing way in Jesus' legacy and university-based UN human rights sustainability society. So if you don't know what I mean, check this out. Globalization has taken place, right? I was an activist, and when I was still not understanding the full connection of all these things conceptually, in the activist circles, globalization was largely understood in terms of the problem, the globalization of U.S. corporate capitalism, or Western corporate capitalism, or the westernization that was undoing a lot of indigenous cultures and the diversity of world cultures. My degree in biological anthropology, with that, I was already aware of a group called Cultural Survival, based at my college, university college, and that kind of issue. And I've seen the term since then, epistemogenocide, talking about how worldviews are lost when cultural diversity is not valued. But that's a university-based perspective, based on having philosophical tools to develop the disciplines like anthropology, right? So then I am the way, Jesus says, right? And so we have this globalization. So there I was, an activist, then after graduation in New York City, and reading this or that, and so concerns, Sting, right? Sting was trying to protect people in the rainforest, the musician. And what do we see? We see that globalization then had that negative side. However, it was also irresistible, and in terms of profiteering business people using corporations, had extended the reach of business everywhere on the globe, basically, right? The fall of the Soviet Union, so in most places of the globe anyway, whatever the case might be in the Islamic world, as part of that. So westernization and globalization. So we have then, that would be the most aggressive side with negative qualities, would be profiteering business people in corporations, then establishing their presence in dominating ways that exploit and alienate people and start to disrupt situations. The attractive side but that's also a mixed bag, because people also want that. They understand, their understanding of economics has been by leaders in most areas of the world was shaped by university-based education. The good side of globalization, with its ability to empower people, as exemplified by people like Wangari Maathai from Kenya, who started the Greenbelt movement for planting trees, and Muhammad Yunus, who founded Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, that Muslim country, pro-poor, pro-women, and where that developed and has spread and arrived in the U.S., not least of all, providing a service that was not being provided in the United States. Pro-poor, pro-women, Grameen Bank, up to 19 branches last I knew, since 2008. So globalization then was this combined process, most famously and infamously in terms of profiteering business people and corporations, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, big soda, big oil, big cars, big auto, and so on. And what else? And so, but then we have the university side, which then emphasizes the possibility of the good side of understanding, even to anthropology, of developing mindsets capable of understanding cultural, psychological, psychosocial, and cultural issues and perspectives. And then that also then reflects the UN World Community of Nations, based on human rights and sustainability concerns, and also empowering civil society, not-for-profits, public interest groups, in all of that. And so what we have then, how do we identify this culture that has spread, university-based and so on? I go to the university-based to emphasize the linkage. The root system is the university-based system, and that university-based system goes back to where? University of Paris was number 2 university founded out of monastic schools there in Paris. And Thomas Aquinas, Italian guy who joined the Spanish Dominican monastic order, Spanish originated monastic order, who then studied in Munich and then went to Paris. I mean, amazing multicultural aspect there. And Thomas Aquinas then Christianized Aristotle's philosophy in an interesting argument that I had intended to get to. I'll leave it for the moment, but he Christianized it in important ways that made empiricism possible. The basic understanding being that now, Aristotle's original first cause argument, for example, specifically, had treated God and the universe as co-eternal. In tracing back causes, Aristotle wasn't actually primarily focused on empirical causation. He was seeing different kinds of causation in terms of and identifying the human mind's ability to conceive a chair or something to build and make. And so he conceived of God in that way, as a conceiver, as sustaining the eternal universe. He didn't see any other trajectories in that. And then, so Thomas Aquinas, in a very interesting way, was able to develop an empirical notion, a notion that infinitude is not empirical. It's not an empirical reality in this plane. It's an abstraction. And so with that, he developed his 5 arguments, including motion, that have empirical implications, although his own scholarly caution led him to avoid making the final assertion of that the universe had been created, although his theological metaphysics apparently incorporated that, although it didn't seem to really play much of a role, I guess, in his range of thinking. But it has empirical implications, and so that is a key point. Thomas Aquinas' grand synthesis at the University of Paris then itself had its origins where, right? It was the monastic system, going back to Anthony the Great, Anthony of the Desert, actually I usually like to say, and that then going back to the apostles, Peter and Paul, and then Jesus himself. So, so there we have it. What is the system that we're talking about? It is in Jesus' legacy. It's his living legacy. It's his commandments, his loving commandments, behavior, cultural behavior. It's a psychosocial framework that has a spiritual practice and metaphysics of relationship to a transcendental entity in terms of a parent. That kind of conduct then that carried forward that we now can study historically and socio-historically. And so that we see that globalization then has that good side in the university-based quality, and that university-based quality also underlies the profiteering business people side in the corporate organization. But how do we characterize that? So, because normally then I talk about Jesus's loving qualities are also a form of integrity. Jesus wasn't trying to pull a fast one on people. He wasn't trying to say, well, I'm good and we can be unjust to others, right? Jesus didn't show that kind of behavior. He healed when Peter cut the ear off the servant. Jesus healed the ear, for example, right? So Jesus had his integrity, and then the question becomes for his followers: what is the integrity of followers, and how do we evaluate that, right? So Jesus cautioned against the problems of making wealth, the deceitfulness of wealth that chokes the word. The way that, well, you know, if you pay for a therapist, if a therapist isn't charging too much money, and you can pay for a therapist, well, then you can clean your cup inside in that way, as I did in part to a certain degree, along with other practices and approaches. John Bradshaw's material was in a book, and I was able to, you know, in the 12-step groups had excellent opportunities and resources, right? So many of us can do work like that and clean the cup on the inside in terms of that specific dynamic. So that's integrity. Now, what are these business people doing, right? They have gone to lengths that can be identified. Marjorie Kelly has a great book, The Divine Right of Capital. Kevin Kruse wrote One Nation Under God, and writers like that have already identified the way that Franklin Delano Roosevelt acts as a key pivotal moment himself, just as Thomas Aquinas did in terms of the university. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, influenced by the social gospel, right, itself started by Washington Gladden in 1877. Franklin Delano Roosevelt then brought a pro-social sensibility as the stock market crash of 1929 demonstrated certain problems with profiteering business activity, speculation. And so his pro-social actions then established the New Deal, the pro-social New Deal, and so on, to his leadership in World War II, prompt and effective in leading the victory of the U.S.'s leading role in the victory of World War II, and then envisioning the UN human rights. So for him and then his legacy, proposing it, negotiating it with the world at that time after that catastrophe, that catastrophic event. So we see then after his pro-social spirit, which had influenced the United States in many ways, interesting ways, with the 90% tax on the upper incomes, then a Reverend Fifield, Kevin Kruse's whole historical analysis is very interesting. Developed a pro-rich gospel, right? He had been preaching to millionaires in Los Angeles, I believe it was, and so then he came to the attention of the business leaders of America's corporations at that time in the 1940s already, apparently, and so that continued and expanded and spread and whatever, and probably is related to McCarthy, right? Where did McCarthy come from? Eugene McCarthy. And Eugene McCarthy, was it? No. Whoever that McCarthy guy was, the anti-communist McCarthy of the 1950s. And then that led to the founding of right-wing think tanks, the Powell Memo, Milton Friedman's 1969 article titled "The Social Responsibility of Business is Profit" in the New York Times. The Powell Memo, that by a lawyer, prominent lawyer, to the Chamber of Commerce, targeting Ralph Nader, who had already established his reputation in interesting ways and important ways. Powell Memo of 1971, published in the Washington Post, leaked to them. And then the right-wing think tanks then that began to proliferate to some degree, representing greater and greater investments by conservative, profiteering business people and their allies. So what do we see? How do we identify that, right? ideological economic materialists at one level, profiteering business people. And so that is low integrity, that is high hypocrisy, or even apostasy in all of that, right? And so then we that's what we're talking about ultimately in terms of. Then we come back to, and then that ultimately is one of the key issues for progressives, right? Progressive Christians who have progressive political values, and in overcoming the compartmentalization and navigating the issues of, secularism, secular materialism. Doesn't mean just because secular materialism has involved valuing spirituality and religious practice doesn't mean that we need to overcome, make a theocracy. What we're talking about ultimately is spiritualizing secularism, to understand that individual spiritual practice, spiritual religious practice, with high integrity then is the focus, is an important focus and an important lifestyle value that relates to Jesus Christ in these ways that I've been describing, and through this understanding in what I consider to be Jesus' greatest legacy, the university-based system of philosophical scholarship with empiricism that seeks philosophical truth, that was originally a spiritual practice for the Christians of Thomas Aquinas' age, and we need to revive, and we can learn to appreciate things like George Fox, who actually didn't have much education. He was there in the same time frame, slightly earlier than Newton himself, but in the same time frame and period as Newton, Descartes, slightly earlier, John Locke in moral philosophy, and Kepler, Galileo, and the rest of those guys, depending slightly earlier or slightly later. But there was George Fox without much education, but spiritual brilliance and insight, representing another phenomenon that can be identified also in Francis of Assisi, who didn't have his visions as a monk. He had his visions as a layperson, and then became an innovative monk type with his mendicant order. Fascinating stuff. And so that kind of process, that we go back to, say, also Anthony of the Desert, who was a pioneering ascetic, Christian ascetic. What we're seeing is these people developing certain important kinds of spiritual practice, which is an important level of integrity in relationship to Jesus and Jesus' teachings and spiritual integrity. So that we're seeing a phenomenon that is resurgent, that is related to integrity. And so I'm seeing the necessity to use the term, seeing the need to use the term resurgent integrity for all of that, and that we experience as individuals as we begin to focus on that. So, all right, 20 minutes here. Here we go. Thanks. So thanks for paying attention. So what is God? Well, we'll get to that in a moment.